contemplated about making a YouTube channel for the longest time, and I finally did it. So I guess I'll start at the very beginning of our story. So in 2017, when I was 18 and my husband was 19, we got married. And I wanted kids so badly. I come from a huge family, and so we started trying for a baby right away. I kind of felt like I might have trouble getting pregnant because I have had irregular cycles my entire teenage years. So it wasn't really much of a surprise to me when month after month after month after month when I wasn't getting pregnant. It was really hard. I was at a job that I hated. I decided not to go to college because I wanted to get married, and I knew that we couldn't afford my husband going to school, me going to school. And I thought, what's the point in going to college if I just really want to have a baby right away? So I guess my plan was always get married, have a baby, and then if I decided I wanted to go to college, then maybe once my husband had his career, then I could go back. So I guess that was kind of my tentative plan. But I was really depressed. My husband was working full-time while going to school full-time. I was working full-time. And it was really hard. It really strained our marriage because I didn't see him much, and it was really hard wanting something so bad, and month after month it wasn't happening. So the first year of our marriage was really hard, and we struggled a lot. Honestly, looking back, I still don't even know how we made it through that first year. But after a year of not being able to get pregnant, I went to see my OB, and I told her I had a hunch. I said, I really feel like I have PCOS. I have several people in my family that have it. So she did a whole bunch of blood work, and she told me, well, if it runs in your family and you have so many symptoms, I would have to agree with you, and it probably is PCOS. So about a week later, all my blood work came back. My hormone levels were really high. My insulin levels were 3 times higher than they should be. So she put me on metformin right away to lower my insulin levels. And she told me lowering those levels may help. It may help regulate my cycle. So she said, just try that and we'll go from there. So after I took that for about 6 months, I would say that it helped a little bit. I did lose some weight, and I was really working hard to eat better and exercising and trying to get myself in shape, hoping that I would fall pregnant. Unfortunately, it still didn't happen. So I went back and I told her, it's not working. I'm still not pregnant. It's been 1.5 years. I'm 18 years old. I shouldn't be having this much trouble, except by that time I think I was 19. So she referred me to a specialist because luckily our insurance covered it. So I saw the specialist. They ran all types of tests. We did genetic testing. They did testing for my husband. I had an HSG test where they put dye through the cervix, and it goes up through the uterus, and then it'll come out the fallopian tubes to see if there is a blockage. So I had that done, all types of different things. So all the tests came back good except my HSG test. They said that my left tube was blocked. So it was determined that I don't ovulate on my own due to the PCOS. But everything else otherwise was good. So we came up with a game plan. She said, let's start on a medication called letrozole in the hopes that it would help mature my follicles, and then the plan was to do a HCG Ovidrel trigger shot. So the letrozole would help mature the follicles, and then the trigger shot would trigger the ovary to release an egg. So that was our plan. So we did the first round, and I grew 2 follicles on my left ovary. And she said, don't even bother with the trigger shot. Your left side is blocked. My insurance didn't pay for the trigger shot because it's not medically necessary. So it did not cover that, and it was pretty expensive. It was a couple $100. So she said, don't waste your money. Don't use it. It's not going to work. Your left side's blocked. So we said, okay. So the next month I went in and they did an ultrasound, and I had a whole bunch of very large cysts on my ovaries. And she said, you know, this can be a side effect of the letrozole. We have to take a month off. So I was crushed, heartbroken. It just stinks to just have to sit there and wait and knowing you're not going to get pregnant. Oh, I was just counting down the weeks until I could go back in and we could try again. So then the next round, we went in. She said, all of the cysts are gone. It looks great. Let's go ahead and we'll try again this cycle. So we try again. I go in and I had 2 follicles on the right and 2 follicles on the left. And she said, okay, I have a good feeling about this. She said, we're going to watch them. Hopefully they mature. So then I went back in 2 days later and they were mature and they were beautiful. And she said, you know, go ahead, go home. You can do your trigger shot. And she said, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, you give me a call to say you're pregnant. So I went home. I gave myself the shot right in the belly on the right side, triggering the right ovary to release the eggs. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, two eggs? That's so exciting. I could end up with twins. I had joked about how if God made me wait this long, he better be giving me twins. So I went home, I did it, and hope for the best. So at this point, it had been 23 months of trying, so just under 2 years. And then a few weeks later, it was just a few weeks shy of our 2-year anniversary, so marking 2 years of how long we'd been trying. I could not wait any longer, and I tested 2 days before I was really supposed to. And I got a blazing positive. And I was like in shock. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so dark. Like, I hope this isn't still leftover HCG from the trigger shot. So then I'm asking people, like, how long should it stay in your system? It's been 12 days. Would it still be in my system? And people are like, I don't think it would still be in there. So then I called the doctor, and they said, it was on a Saturday that I tested, so they said, come in Monday, we'll do your blood work. So I went in, they said my levels were great, and I was indeed pregnant. They said, come back in 2 days, and we want to see if your levels double. So I went in, they tripled, and they were so excited, and my levels were really, really high. So of course I went straight to Google, what is a normal HCG level for however far along I was at that point. And I was well above the normal range. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's twins. I knew I was going to have twins. I remember telling my husband, I can't believe it. We're definitely having twins. I feel it. I know it's twins. And of course, he's like getting ready to have a heart attack, because at this point I was 20 and he was 21, and he's like, we can't be having twins right now, because he was, I think about that point, he was 1 semester away from graduating. Yeah, so this was October, and he was set to graduate in the spring, and then I would be having the baby in June. Perfect timing. And we thought, okay, this was God's plan all along. He just wanted us to wait until he finished school. That way he could have a good, steady job, and maybe I wouldn't have to work, and I could stay home with the baby for a while. And then if I wanted to later, I could go back to work. And we thought, everything's falling into place. This is exactly why we had to wait this long. So then the following week, they had me go in for a really early ultrasound at only 5 weeks, and they said, you probably won't see a heartbeat because it's very early, but because my left tube was blocked, they really wanted to make sure that the baby did implant in the uterus and it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy, and that the baby didn't implant in one of my fallopian tubes. So we go in, super excited, super nervous. It was a resident doctor that was doing the ultrasound, and she just kind of had this look on her face, and she told me, okay, yeah, the baby looks like it's where it's supposed to be. And we're like, oh, thank goodness, that's amazing. And, you know, I'm just kind of looking at her like, I bet you she sees twins. I bet you she sees two, and that's why she's making that funny face. And then she said, okay, it looks like you ovulated from the left side. And I'm like, are you sure? Said, my left side's blocked. I can't ovulate from that side. And she's like, well, you know, maybe when you got the HSG test, maybe it, like, I don't know, maybe it helped clear the blockage. I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe she's just seeing things. So then the doctor comes in, and the first thing she says when she walks in the room is, I see twins. And I just look at my husband like, I freaking told you. And we're so excited. And before we can even say anything, she says, I think there's 4 or 5. She pulls up a chair. Her face is just ghost white. And I look at my husband like, did she just say what I think she just said? So for the next few minutes, but what felt like 2 hours, she was measuring and counting and remeasuring and recounting. And then she says, there's 5 babies in there. And I'm like, what do you mean there's 5? And she said, you somehow ovulated from both sides. All 4 of those follicles matured, released an egg, implanted, and she said, I guess one of the other follicles you had must have matured as well. Because at this point, we were only 5 weeks along, and each of them had separate sacs. So we really thought, you know, I don't think any of them are identical. So she told us right then and there, she said, you know, selective reduction is an option, and we didn't even let her finish. I mean, I was scared out of my mind, but I just knew that that wasn't something I was open to, and we told her no. So then they had me come back in a week, and they told me, you know, it's quite possible that we will come back and there will not be 5. She said, we could come back and there may be 3, there may be 2, but the chances of all 5 of them sticking was not very likely. So we were nervous, we were scared, but at the same time we felt like, okay, you know, I mean, it's not really going to be 5. But then it was also sad thinking, you know, those little people in there, you know, we may lose some of them. So we went back in a week, and much to our surprise, 5 very strong heartbeats. They all were growing. They all looked amazing. So at that time, I was referred to my maternal fetal medicine doctor. When I went in there, I met the doctor. We did an ultrasound. We got blood work. We did all types of different things. They talked about the risks, and he told me, he said, I don't know if they've talked to you about this yet, but there's selective reduction. And I said, no, we cannot go through with that. As scared as I was, I just knew that that wasn't something I could do. I don't feel that it's my position to say whether or not a baby should live or die. That's not my decision. God put them in me, and I had to carry it out and see through. So I was really nervous. I was depressed. I felt like I had been robbed. I wanted a normal, healthy pregnancy, and knowing that you're pregnant with quintuplets, you just know right off the bat it's going to be a long road. They could all end up not making it. I mean, my life was at risk. They could all end up with severe problems. It was terrifying. I think probably for the next 2 weeks, I could hardly get out of bed. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. I was extremely depressed. I didn't understand why God would do this to me. So the weeks were long. I ended up quitting my job at around 15 weeks along because it just became too much on my body. But sitting at home was really hard. I lost a lot of weight in the first trimester because I just couldn't eat anything. And then anytime I did eat, I just felt like I was just in so much pain. It was like my stomach didn't have any room because there were so many babies in there. So then at 16 weeks along was when we got to find out the genders. Literally from day one, I said, it's 3 girls and 2 boys. You know, everybody had their guesses and everything. And the day we go in, sure enough, 3 girls and 2 boys. And I couldn't believe I was right. Then I think that day was the first day that I really felt like, wow, I'm really going to have quintuplets. And it was the first time that I really felt excited and happy. We started trying to think of names. Then I started really putting together my baby registry, and it really became an exciting time. Then right around there was when we announced to everybody that we were pregnant with quintuplets. Then we started getting on the news, and I'm thankful for that because we had a huge community baby shower right after the babies were born, and because of that, we still have yet to buy diapers. It's pretty amazing. So the pregnancy went really well. It was very uneventful until I went for my checkup at 23 weeks, and they told me I was dilating, my cervix had thinned out, and I needed to be put on bed rest in the hospital. So they monitored me there. I stayed for a week, and I just was so depressed because it was just hard sitting in a hospital room all day long. It was cold outside, so I couldn't go outside. My husband was going to school. He was also working full time, and he usually worked nights. He would work like 2 to 10 or something like that. So it was pretty hard. He couldn't stay with me in the hospital because we had a dog at home and he had school and work. So it was really a difficult time. But after a week, they let me go home because nothing had progressed. And I promised to be on my best behavior and just lay on the couch at home. So I went home, and then a week later, I was getting up and getting ready to go to an appointment, and I noticed I was bleeding a little bit. So I was 25 weeks, 2 days along. I decided I'm just going to skip this appointment and I'm just going to go straight to labor and delivery. So I was always told to call ahead of time because if I was indeed in labor, they needed to know so they could get a whole huge team of people ready. So I called them. I got there and they hooked me up to monitors and everything. They told me I was a little bit more dilated than the last time when I was checked. And within about an hour of being there, the monitor was picking up some contractions, but I didn't feel them at first. And then out of nowhere, I felt one. I felt a contraction. And then right after that, another one. And then another one, and then another one. And then I had like 7 really strong contractions within like 30 minutes. And within that hour of being there, I had dilated 2 more centimeters. So at this point, I was at like a 5. And they told me, okay, we have to deliver. And I was just shocked. I was like, no, it's too early. My goal was to get to 30 weeks. I was only 25. I was like, no, I'm still 5 weeks away. I'm not ready. They're too small. They're not ready. And then instantly the anesthesiologist came running in, getting ready to give me the epidural. There were 2 nurses putting IVs in me. People were running around. It was kind of chaotic. It was like organized chaos. So we called our families for like, it's time, the babies are coming. So then a little after 7 p.m. that night, we went down to the OR. By 8 o'clock, all 5 babies were here. It was crazy. I don't really remember much of being in the delivery room. I just remember I couldn't breathe. I remember they had to give me oxygen. I remember throwing up a couple times. And I remember one of the labor and delivery nurses was praying with me. And I remember my anesthesiologist was absolutely amazing. I will never forget her. She truly kept me calm. And I remember telling both her and my husband, please keep talking to me. Please keep me distracted. So then when they took me back to recovery, everything was good. They took all the babies away. They all had to be intubated because they were so small. They were all under 2 pounds. They told me that they would bring the babies by before they took them over to the children's hospital. So then they told me baby D, who we ended up naming Meredith, they said she was really unstable. She really wasn't doing well. She wasn't even stable enough to be transported. Then finally, after a while, they brought her by so I could see her after they had gotten her stabilized. And she was just perfect. Then a little while later, they brought by babies A and B, which were our other girls. And then at this point, they had said that Meredith was at the NICU, baby D. Meredith was at the NICU and she still wasn't doing well. She was stable, but they were very worried about her. So then, honestly, I can't remember if this was before they brought the boys to see me or after, but they said, your husband needs to go over to the NICU right now. They are really scared for Meredith. We don't know if she's going to make it. I was so scared. Him and my dad and his parents and his brother ran over to the NICU, which was about a 5-10 minute drive, I think. But they got over there as quickly as they could. They took me up to my room. And I didn't know, but all of my siblings came down to the hospital to see me, and they all just came flooding into my room. And we all just cried and we just prayed for hours. And then finally they said Meredith was stable. And at this point it was like 2 a.m. So everybody went home. My husband came back. We slept. Then bright and early in the morning we got a phone call. She's not doing well. She's not doing well. You have to come back. At this point I still wasn't allowed to leave the hospital. So my husband ran over there, and after he was there for a while, she did stabilize. Then once I was able to get up out of bed and I was able to walk, and they removed my catheter, and they took my IV out, I was able to get a pass so I could go over to the NICU. And then we named everybody. Baby A, she was Philomena Rose. She was 1 pound, 9 ounces. Baby B is Evangeline Margaret. She was 1 pound, 10 ounces. Then baby C is Gideon Michael. He was 1 pound, just under 13 ounces. And then baby D obviously is Meredith, 1 pound, 4 ounces. And then baby E is Elliot Sebastian, and he was 1 pound 11 ounces. I couldn't believe how small they were. I mean, they were seriously like the length of your hand. Like, they could literally sit right on the palm of your hand. That was their whole entire body. I remember looking at how small their feet were, and that they were literally like the size of like this part of my thumb. Like, that is what their foot was. I just couldn't believe how tiny they were, but also how perfect they were. Meredith did stabilize, and she was okay for the rest of the day. And then I believe it was the day after that, she was still struggling, and she had a collapsed lung, and they had to put a chest tube in. But for the rest of the day after that, she seemed pretty stable. The other babies were stable for the most part. They were all intubated. They were all on ventilators. 2 of the babies needed to be put on a different type of ventilator called an oscillator. It was very scary to look at. Instead of them getting like big breaths through the ventilator, it was like just lots of really tiny breaths. And it was really scary because their chest was like, it almost looked like it was just like pounding. But they had to be on that. It was really scary to watch. Elliot was like smooth sailing. Him and Evangeline, they were doing amazing, like beyond anyone's expectations. And then that night before we left, they had said they were worried about Meredith's blood count. Despite several transfusions, her blood count was still really low. So they said they were going to do a head ultrasound in the morning because they suspected a brain bleed. And they said, you know, that it's very common for babies at, you know, being born at this gestation, especially with high order multiples, it increases the risk. But they said, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong, but they just want to check in the morning. So I was discharged that day, and then, so on March 8th, 3 days after they were born on March 5th. So March 8th, I got a phone call bright and early in the morning. They said, get dressed, get something to eat, but we need you to come up to the NICU as soon as you can. Meredith has a grade 4 brain bleed, which is the highest grade. Her ventricles are severely enlarged. She has tons of extra fluid on her brain. She's still not doing well respiratory-wise. She's not going to make it. We would really recommend you to take her off the ventilator and withdraw care. Otherwise, you're just prolonging the inevitable. She would need a shunt today or tomorrow. There's no guarantee she would make it through the surgery because she is so small and she is so fragile. But she will not make it. And if she did, she would never have any quality of life whatsoever. She would basically live in a vegetative state. But she is not going to make it. That phone call shattered me. We told our families. We ran up to the NICU as soon as we could. We walk in, there were nurses everywhere. Our families were there. Everybody was just crying, and we spent the whole day with Meredith, and just after 5 p.m. that day, she went to heaven. She died peacefully in my arms while holding on to my finger. And it was the worst day of my life. I remember asking my mom, how do we move on from this? What happens next? Where do we go from here? And I remember her just crying and looking at me and saying, I don't know. The next few weeks were really hard, and I honestly don't remember much of it at all. It's really a blur. The other babies made some improvements. They would take a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, but overall they were doing okay. I was able to hold Evie for the first time the day after Meredith died, and I needed that. I really, really needed it. Holding this teeny tiny little thing right on my chest and just feeling her skin against mine, it just kind of made me feel like maybe it's going to be okay. And I knew right in that moment that these other 4 babies needed me, and that even though I wanted to just crawl into a hole and I was just ready to I was ready to die myself. I was ready to I remember telling God, just take me. Just take me. I don't need to be here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to live life without my daughter. But then I remember that those other 4 babies needed me. And I knew I had to be strong for them. And that my husband needed me. We needed each other. Her death brought us closer together. I think it made us all appreciate what we have a lot more. It was really hard getting through that. And it's not something you ever can move on from. It's not something you ever get over. I think it just gets a little bit easier with time. But yeah, the next few weeks, few months actually, I really don't remember much of it. Elliot came home right after their due date. So he spent 107 days in the NICU. His stay was very uneventful. He just had to learn to breathe on his own, grow, and learn to eat. Philomena was pretty much the same. She struggled a little bit more in the beginning with, she had some issues with her blood sugar. She had some respiratory issues, but surprisingly, she actually got over the hump and she did great. She came home about a month after Elliot did. She had some struggles with feeding, but eventually she got it and she got to come home. Evangeline suffered a brain bleed. She obtained some brain damage, and that made us really scared. She also, not long after being diagnosed with PVL, which is damage to the white matter in her brain, she actually got an infection in her intestines called NEC. We were lucky and she never had to have a surgery or anything like that. Just lots of medications, and she was very, very sick for a few weeks, but eventually she got over it and she was okay. And Gideon just had horrible, horrible lungs. Eventually, when he was about 4 months old, he had to get a trach. That is when they placed an artificial airway into his trachea. He couldn't get off the vent, so they decided it's not good for him to be intubated for 4 months. It's not good for him developmentally. He was starting to fight the tube, so we went ahead with the surgery, and he started to improve after that. Gideon did not come home until right after his first birthday. It was a really long, hard year, and it really just feels like a blur. I don't remember much of that first year at all, and I wish that I did. But this is not an all sad story. These kids have changed me. They truly have. Evie and Gideon have their struggles. Evie was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Gideon still has his trach, but he is weaning off the ventilator, and he doesn't have any neurological issues. He doesn't have any other health issues. And Mina and Elliot are as healthy as can be. No health issues whatsoever. They're developmentally right on track for being 18 months old. So that's basically our story up to this point. I hope you'll subscribe and follow along, and I'd love to make some more videos, but this is just our story so far.